But even then, I feel like it was a deck that people put into their tournament lineup, didn't really practice it, didn't really put a whole lot of stock into it. It's just like, yeah, this is a good deck, but it's a generic aggro deck. I'll just, figure it out as I go along. And I think if the weeks have gone past, we've seen people get better at manipulating Divine Shields, health breakpoints to really help you out in some of the anti-aggro matchups, really understanding how to abuse Mind Render Elucia to the fullest to actually just scam out victories in unwinnable positions. And I think now this Priest might just be in a position where it is the deck in the format right now.
We'll have to see how it does for now. As we kick into game number 1, Frenetic on the bottom on that Priest, going up against Seiko on the Rogue. And Seiko with double Prize Plunderer means with the help of a couple of other cards, he does have some options of spot removal, but Frenetic has an option to go extremely wide. I don't know whether you're excited or becoming a monk, Subtle. But yeah, this is a huge board.
It's just turn 1, kill your thing, put 8 damage in play. Like, hello? How is this legal? That's also pretty illegal. Hang on.
Shadow Step's a good pickup.
Shadow Step is disgusting, right?
The only problem is that's everything pretty much Seiko has, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, by the way, but Seiko's playing then off the top of his deck, and so would Frenetic be to an extent, but Priest is kind of built to do that, whereas Rogue is not. I think he has to respect it. Ooh, okay.
I was going to say, I think this might just be a dagger turn and just try and find something, right? Because if you pick up another 1-drop next turn, like any 1-drop, you can actually activate the first Prize Plunderer as well and snipe off another 1/1, right? And then you're doing a ton of work. Yeah, I mean, that will do the job, absolutely, Raven. Of course, it does get punished by Cold Neophyte. I'm sure Seiko will have been thinking about this at the time, but I just don't think the turn was effective enough because the first Prize Plunderer didn't do anything. So it'd be Plunderer, second Plunderer a 1/1, Shadow Step the Plunderer, and then kill the 1/3. It just doesn't really clear that much stuff up.
This turn's great, though. Prep for 1 mana, Plunderer, Plunderer, Step, Plunderer.
Yep.
That'll do the job.
Give me that.
The old 1, 2, 3 as well.
Frenetic was fine with that turn until he saw the 0-mana Shadow Step come down at the end of the turn, which honestly, the way things work out, you might even forget is possible, right? Like, Prep gets played, and you're like, oh, that's weird. You played a Prep with a Neophyte, and then the Prize Plunderers start coming down. You're like, oh, okay, sure, yeah, that makes sense. And you just forget that the Prep still is applying the discount at the end. And Shadow Step comes down and absolutely ruins your day. And now, Seiko has a good opportunity to just capitalize on some tempo here. Just be ahead on board.
Yeah, the positive thing here for Frenetic is, one, once that Homunculus comes out, it's a pretty awkward target to deal with from Seiko, if Seiko's still starved of resources. And also, Frenetic has a way better hero power. He can just kill the Neophyte for 2 mana next turn, and hopefully for him, play a minion that challenges this 2/1, and then sort of build on that every single turn. Maybe hero power Merchant the turn after, and so on. Oh.
A fine
Wait, is he playing the... Oh, I thought he was playing the Merchant.
He's going to cycle it. Yeah.
What is this?
Ooh, that's a very nice draw. He's going to hold it, though. I like this. He can afford to tank the 2 here, right? And this means that he can potentially make more of a swing turn on the following turn. Maybe a dagger gets used up as well when the 2/1 comes down, but no real reason to bring it down. Rock just going in the deck.
Well, Seiko has a Field Contact and a Dream next turn. We'll have 3 mana spare to do things, but he needs very specific draws to make them happen, whereas Frenetic, after a bit of a delay, is going to start piling on the pressure.
Yeah. And now you see the benefit of the hold, right? Even with Tour Guide, he can choose to now use the Gordon Org Merchant, apparently, for... a Divine Shield instead of a ping, but the important thing about saving it for this turn is now the Taunt has woken up, right? So the 2/1 minion is protected from the dagger, even now giving it the extra health as well. So just held back, tanked 2 damage, and it gave him a wide variety of options for this turn instead.
And to be fair, so Gordon is a pretty great name for that card. It's Gordon Freeman, right?
That's true, yeah. And now we're just piling on the pressure for Frenetic.
Yeah.
Nice and simple. He had that little sticky bit in the mid-game. By mid-game, I mean turn 3, when the prize plunderers came down, really messed up his board, but he was able to reconsolidate. And even then, kept a cool head, made a couple of smart decisions there with with Gordon to be able to maximize his pressure over the course of 2 turns. But now, Shroud of Concealment, there's potential for a swing turn for Seiko. The issue is, prize plunderers are gone, right? They were all used in 1 turn. So how do you really answer this board state from this position?
Yeah, I mean, he does run that 1 pen flinger, which would be a big deal. A brain freeze definitely helps. Cheap way to draw another card as well. Now he's got a shadow step. It's something. Do you think he brain freezes the 1 maker here? Oh,
Sorry?
sorry, brain freeze is the 1 maker. Shadow step's the 1 maker. It's because he played brain freeze, as I said it.
I think so, yeah. It's interesting that he's even continuing to go with pen. Yeah, okay, actually, he's going to step the field contact. Interesting.
Agreed.
Because I think if he wanted to step the 1 thief, he would have done it with mana left, right? With 1 mana remaining before playing the pen flinger in that position. So as soon as he'd done that, he was committed to something else. But this is still going to be a very difficult race to win from this position because there's 7 going face this turn, which puts Seiko on a 2-ping clock.
I think Frenetic should just play the Merchant here. Although, yes, you could shuffle in for a different card. What other card except exactly a Lucia is really going to be better than Merchant in a lot of scenarios?
Well, there's another Void Touched Attendant, which is lethal, right? There's a Raised Dead, which could be a Void Touched Attendant, which is lethal. There's the 2 Decepticons, which could get Raised Dead, which could get a Void Touched Attendant, which is lethal. There's Mind Render Lucia, which is lethal. There's a lot of cards. That's not one of them.
Told you, it's just a bad idea. I can say that now that it's happened.
But you can see the logic, right? That was a lot of outs, and I probably didn't even name all of them at that point.
I guess I just, like, with the Plunderers gone, the Shadow Step's gone, I'm just wondering how Seiko would even clear this board and kill the Merchant, I guess is the question.
Yeah, no, I agree, but also if you want to look at it from a different perspective, like Frenetic just needs 2 damage to stick next turn, so even if he drew a minion that had 2 attack that wasn't this 1/4, that minion could also live and would be lethal on the following turn, right? The Merchant being the Merchant's health pool, which was attractive, obviously, but again, we've seen 2 Plunderers get used on the other side as well, so how relevant that even ends up being is kind of interesting.
Seiko is doing his best here to fight back and gain something, and he's getting a big reduction down, can still continue doing a couple of things, but again, with the Plunderers gone and the Shadow Steps gone, like, is there actually a way for him to deal with this?
I think dealing with it is out of the question. I think the more interesting out was just finding some weird, scammy lethal for Seiko, right? Because there was already 1 Garrote played, a couple of bleeds have been drawn, but there was the other Garrote in hand. And you can see he is committing the spell damage to the board right away, so maybe could have got into a very strange position. And I think that's probably mostly what the Shadow Step field contact was about on the previous turn. But, you know, when I talk about holes in the deck strategy, I think that's kind of one of them right there, is that Prize Plunderer is the only decent removal option they play in the whole deck, and it's very situational. We see that trying to be remedied by, for example, the list that Gabby plays, which plays 2 Brooms. So in that situation, the Seiko was just in, you know, boom, Broom comes down, right? And then just clear the whole thing up. And then Frenetic would have played differently and perhaps used the Traveling Merchant there instead in that position. But with the most conventional list that we see these days, boards like this from Shadow Priest are extremely difficult to deal with.
It's honestly one of the additional reasons why I was thinking about the Shadow Step on the 1 Thief, because that can bring out either AoE or just weird things that you can, you know, progress the game and last a little bit longer with, whether that's freeze, any kind of delay, AoE, spot removal, whatever. So yeah, interesting just to see Seiko choose to go for the option of the more sort of big blowout turn potential and hope that is that kind of recovery he would have needed. As we move on into game number 2, another reminder, we've had 1 game now. Of course, this is Conquest, not LHS from last week, which means Frenetic's Priest is now gone. He's 1-0 up with it, so the Priest goes away now, and he's going to queue his Rogue into Seiko's Rogue list as well. So we're looking at a pretty much identical mirror. A couple of, like, I think, there's 1 card difference because there's 2 1 Thieves here, right?
Yes, indeed. It's a Foxy Fraud that Seiko
see.
was playing that Frenetic is choosing not to in this case. Otherwise, identical. One Penflinger, as we saw from Seiko as well, and two Preps, which has become more and more common as time has gone on as well. We've seen, I think, players have varying degrees of success with this deck. We talked about it a lot in the intro as well, about how much of that is due to player skill, player knowledge with the deck, how much of it is the deck just not quite being as good as everyone perhaps first thought it was. But at the same time, it's been the most brought deck to Grandmasters over the last couple of weeks, so clearly all the players agree with it. We saw Rank 1 Legend being sniped left, right and center with the deck over time, but continuously now in Grandmasters, it is underperforming. It is hovering around that mid 40% win rate overall. But now we're going to see the matchup that's just going to make the win rate trend towards 50, Raven. We're going to be seeing the mirror.
It is one thing that's fascinating to me at this moment in time, because we've had Garrote Rogue that we've seen a lot of, I'm going to say this word, so don't shower me, but a lot of like influencers in the Hearthstone scene in terms of top-level players, whether they're Grandmasters or not, just top-level respected players. Oh, Garrote Rogue's insane. It's insane. Like, best deck, high skill cap. It's just the best. Now we're having that with, like, this hybrid sort of brute OTK Demon Hunter, and I'm just like, is one of these players just trying to make a meta that they just choose is going to be the meta now? I'm just saying, oh, now this is the highest skill deck. Everyone play this. Q's counter. Like that sort of approach. So I'm interested to see how this does progress, and maybe in a couple weeks' time.
If any of you watched the most recent episode of Hot Takes, I submitted the idea that no one knows anything about this metagame as a take, which I think is accurate, because it feels like whether it's been a new deck coming out of nowhere, whether it's been a balance patch, whether it's been something else that's shaken up the meta, everything has changed every single week, and I think it's emblematic of what we've seen here, where suddenly we see almost 15 out of 16 players submitting the absolute same lineup, involving a deck that didn't even exist when I recorded that hot take, Like, that just seems to be how we're progressing. And now we have another wave of nerfs coming around in the future. Like, another huge shake-up to this game with nerfs and buffs recently being announced by Alec on Twitter. So this metagame has been impossible, I think, to get a handle on, as to really have strong, consistent opinions as what's strong and what's weak. And I think that's why we're seeing so much of that, okay, this is the best deck. No, okay, 24 hours later, no, this is the best deck. I think it's been a really, really hard metagame to get to grips with overall.
What has been strong, though, is Frenetic's opening. He has got this Octobot procced. It's a reasonable proc still. Is fishing for the field contact as ever as Rogue, honestly, at this point.
Yeah.
But has some pretty solid reductions, right? Can do some pretty tempo-based turns with Prize Plunderer, One Thief, and Brain Freeze available to him. Does have the 0-mana secret passage that allows him to dig through a little bit more, but Seiko's also returned the favor by getting a pretty solid reduction himself, although not hitting anything huge, right? The 2 0-mana secret passages are pretty strong, but nothing game-winning, I would say. For example, a field contact.
Yes, did largely gloss over the early game here for both players, but generally the early game in the mirror of this deck is going to be fairly simple. It's going to be accruing resources and then discounting them. Now with this secret passage, we've hit, I think, first real hard decision point for Frenetic. Does pick up a field contact. Would be very interesting to see if we hit a shadow step here. Could even continue to do so off the Swindle. He is just going to go ahead and drop the contact though and see what we can come up with. Swindle, of course, has a very decent chance of picking up a shadow step.
Oh, another Swindle.
Second Swindle. There is a little bit of hand size concern here, though. I believe 6 cards in the original hand before the secret passage. So yeah, that is now a full 10 for Frenetic.
And just a casual 9 cards left in the deck on turn.
Mm-hmm. However, that is worrying, because there's no Shadow Steps in his hand, there's 1 Ethereal Org Merchant still in the deck, and there is a Field Contact and 2 Garrots, and an Efficient Octobot. A good 75% of those remaining 9 cards are very, very bad to be Frenetic's next draw.
1 in 4, I like those odds. I'm sure Frenetic does as well. Seiko, much slower in the approach this turn, but he does have field contact and some potential procs next turn. It's just, what does he actually do? Is he feeling okay about trade these minions and pass to then try and do something big next turn? It's horrible, but does he have any more options? Oh, he does. This is another option. I didn't expect this.
My hand is too full.
Ooh. Frenetic gives a shrug. It is going to make his life significantly more difficult, though. There are ways to mitigate this, though, as long as he keeps all of his other resources. Keeps the Ethereal Orb Merchants, keeps the Shadow Steps. He's so deep in his deck, right, that he's not going to need to be Shadow Stepping a field contact for draw this game. And then perhaps Kazakus, 1 mana spell damage Golem, for example. Or, alternatively, throw all that out the window and just win board and hit your opponent in the face with a wide board of cheap minions, I think is a very reasonable way to go about this as well. Evocation is a smart pickup here because that can make up some of that lost damage as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest deal there was Frenetic emptying hand space. I mean, he does have tempo, which is great, but he really just wanted to play Shroud, right, to cycle through, get hold of those minions.
For sure.
Now Seiko back on the no field contact outcome here, with that one being cleaned up by Frenetic. Does have Passage as his only card draw, right, that he has access to right now?
Yeah, a little bit scary as well, because it might not be immediately obvious with the way some of the discounts are working, but there is a Cult Neophyte down this turn, which makes Secret Passage a little bit scary. Of course, the Shadow Step and the Secret Passage were discounted by the Octobot to the point where they are just regular cost in hand after the Neophyte has come down.
Care to make a wager, friend?
Manages to cheat 2 mana with the Brain Freeze. The way the Foxy Fraud interaction works. There is that one unique card to Seiko's deck coming into play there.
Too soon.
This must be terrifying in Seiko's position. He has seen a Garrote burn, which is a huge deal, but just the fact that Frenetic's so much deeper in the deck and Seiko keeps looking like he's just about evening up the turns, which feels bad when your opponent is further in the deck, because it means that they're going to push more damage. It's a reasonable effort, though. I think Seiko's planning on his next turn potentially even being the last, at the rate in which the game's been going so far.
Yes, but we are in still a reasonable position here for Frenetic, for example. Like, if you're going to do the X+4 breakpoint, right? 2 spell damage minions, both Shadow Stepped for +4 spell damage. That means the Garrote and the 3 bleeds will each be doing 6 damage. So 6 times 4 is 24. That's a nice number when Seiko's at 25 and you're rogue and have a dagger. So you can see this is still very doable for Frenetic at this point, even though one Garrote has been burned. It just needs to work out the best way to ration this all out. And of course, find his way through the last 5 cards of his deck as well.
Too soon.
Self-draw a card will do that job fairly nicely.
Brain Freeze just to slow the game down a little bit more, kill off the Foxy Fraud, save 3, and make Seiko have to at least half respect this Kazakus.
Yeah, now with the Cult Neophyte down, Seiko's going to use this turn for the Secret Passage instead to go digging. He has the same concerns with Swindles coming into hand, which always introduce those hand size problems, especially with Penflinger to account for here as well.
Is there any world in which he just plays everything except the field contact and Ogre Merchant here?
I think that's a reasonable line for sure, yeah. I'm interested that the Penflinger does still keep coming down here. Shadow Step is interesting because he could now use that to keep the field contact in his original hand, and that was one of my concerns, right? It was one of my concerns going into Frenetic's turn as well when he started doing prep, swindle, was like, well, hang on. What happens if you hit Shadow Step and you want that field contact back in your hand at the end of the turn, right? Your hand is now too full to make that happen, plus your original hand, which I think is always something you have to look out for. Shadow Step interaction, yes, to do exactly this. Transfer a field contact from the passage back to your original hand, but original hand size concerns always play into that as well.
Yeah, and really, all Seiko did when he pivoted a little bit on that turn after the Shadow Step, all he did was not play a Neophyte this turn, and I think that is an absolutely fine trade, right? You would happily have that 1-cost field contact instead.
Agreed. And now Seiko is looking pretty set up for the following turn. If we could take a look at his last 5 remaining cards for the following turn, you can see that there is that one efficient Octobot through which all things are possible here, because otherwise he has an incredibly cheap hand. It's just the mana that he has to spend on the Garots, which might be a sticking point, but even then, 1 mana field contact, right? You would imagine that he can start putting together a pretty effective lethal next turn.
Yeah, it's also interesting, right, how flexible that Shadow Step is with this hand, because he's got either Orc Merchant, or he could even potentially, with the fact that he's got Penflinger, go for double Octo reduction if he really needs the mana instead of the spell damage.
Counter spell's pretty interesting, okay. Reasonable pickup. No Shadow Step used there for Frenetic. I think, again, he's understanding he needs all of his resources. I think if this was still a double Garrote game, we might even be seeing Shadow Step on the card draw golem there, just to draw another card, try and hit field contact, right? Try and end the game from that position. But if Frenetic does not hold on to all of his resources, 2 Orc Merchants, 2 Shadow Steps from this point, he won't have the damage to get there. So that wasn't really an option to him. Again, because of that secret passage turn, which ended up with a card being burned, which I think I counted, what, 6 out of 9 at the time were painful cards to discard off the top on that turn. I think as long as the Octobot is found in relatively clean
I can see it.
Whoa, okay.
Is he just going to try and delay 1 more turn and then pop off next turn?
It looks like it, yeah. He's just dropping the Neophytes instead. But now the counterspell is going to come into play, which leaves the field contact stranded on board.
Which means he can't draw a card guaranteed next turn after the Garotes, right?
Right.
Efficient is
So
sufficient.
he could potentially Kazakus the last card draw, couldn't he, with a 1-cost?
Yes. Oh, brutal. Do you have to go Orc Merchant, Wand Thief? I mean, the double Neophyte is disgusting, though, because even, like, Cram Session costs so much to play in this position.
And the Garote, right? Doing all that's no point unless you're playing Garote. That's 3.
Yep, exactly.
You're paying for my discretion.
I think
try something,
the only reasonable out, exactly, yeah. Just got to do something. Burst Flame, usually incredibly efficient in this deck, but each proc of it costing 3 at this point, not going to get there.
He does know that that's the last field contact, right?
Yeah.
But does he ever just hope he can't get a card draw and just first flame the field contact?
Fireball. There's the Cram Session, but too late at this point, you'd have to imagine. He's just going for it. Okay, I can see this. He's just going for the out right now, right? Assuming this all fits, but he can't get the... Yeah, there's no way you're going to get Garrote and Cram Session in there at that point. Yeah, I kind of feel like the best out at that point is just to focus on killing the field contact and hope your opponent's made a mess on the other side, which they kind of had in that position. There's a few turns in there where things are a little bit suspect. I think perhaps if Seiko had planned to go for like a Shadow Step Octobot line on his turn, there were lethal outs. Those lethal outs obviously would have been denied by the counterspell either way, don't get me wrong. But his intention with the Shadow Step looked like it was to Shadow Step the field contact, which I'm not necessarily sure was the right way to go about it, because he could have died on the backswing in a lot of worlds if Frenetic had just drawn second contact, for example. But I did like the double Neophyte on that turn. I think that's where he was tunneled into, just getting those 2 Neophytes down, and felt like he should be pretty comfortable, which is absolutely right in doing so. For Frenetic there in the end, yeah, I think he was desperately searching for lethal outs, which didn't really exist Whereas maybe like a more crucial examination of the game state would have led him to just killing the field contact. Although, what was the one last remaining card in Seiko's deck at that point? It was a Brain Freeze? Okay, so yeah, he would have needed 1 mana draw a card from the Golem, right? To really do anything effective.
And because he got offered First Flame, he wouldn't have had to interrupt any of his combo, right? He could have just gone First Flame, Second Flame.
Yeah.
And then you just lost a 1-thief for that privilege, I guess. So, like, it would have looked okay. But, of course, in the moment, when you think you might be dead and you're fishing for lethal, it can get very, very tough to make those sort of level-headed decisions with every piece of information needs to come together at the same time. Moving on, though, it looks like it's going to be one of those days, Sol. Priest versus Rogue again, but on the other side this time, as Frenetic is still trying to get a win with this Rogue. Seiko moving on to the Priest. And I will say, if Seiko manages to win this game, it will be quite a surprise for this series, because typically Priest doesn't fare as well versus the Rogue as I think just sweeping it, as we've seen so far this series. I know we disagree with this.
I was going to say, that was a lot of what I'm not even sure what you were trying to say. There was a lot of muddled words in the middle of that sentence. You think
Rogue
Priest shouldn't beat Rogue twice in a series, is what you said, right?
Sure,
essentially. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we disagree.
I know we do. It's just fine. I'm not kicking off.
Well, I am, Raven.
I'm not.
Let's fight about it.
I'm muting you. One sec.
Oh, okay.
You can fight all you want. I just want to hear you. A good start for Seiko, though. Just have a bit of a floating turn 2 right now.
Yeah. I mean...
Just give me 1 more mana.
I mean, 2 mana, 3 damage doesn't seem like floating a turn that badly to me, honestly. And then go Org Merchant. Wriggle, wriggle, wriggle next turn.
What if he just wriggles this turn?
Or just wriggle.
I think I like this more.
So it pushes 1 extra plus potentially 3 extra, with the Wriggling Horror being in play.
Not dead to Brain Freeze.
Yep, true. Respect that.
Oh, the turn 4 for Seiko is ready. If he can draw Raise Dead if he's playing this now.
Imagine thinking this hand gets to Gandling, Raven.
It's so tempting to not play it though, right? He's a madman.
Imagine, Raven.
He's a madman.
You do not understand the pure abusive power of Mind Render Lucia. Come on. If your opponent plays an Octobot, you're playing their hand. That's just the line. This card's gross. Hold on. How many cards have been played? 1, 2. Desk Imp, Mind Render Lucia. So now Coin is 3. Octobot is 4, so he cannot prize plunder his own Octobot to discount the rest of the cards, right? No, he cannot.
Good talk.
Oh well, never mind. I guess we'll just do everything else instead. Of course, those bleeds are in the Rogue deck, but Seiko gets the initial damage off the original Garrot. I'm sure that's a price he is willing to pay.
It's one thing that like mentally trips you up the first time, right? When you do the Okay, well that's not fair. Anyway, moving on.
Do you remember like 35 seconds ago, Raven, when you were talking about Seiko's turn 4
if
being
you're just
set?
gonna meme the win,
you remember
that just doesn't count. But yeah, it is one thing that does sort of mentally trip you up a little bit when you use Garrot on the Lucia turn, and you're like, wait, who's the real benefactor from this turn? But obviously, one, shuffling the bleeds in randomly for your opponent is a lot better than them planning them, and so on. But yeah, Seiko got a victory there with the Priest, and I think going back from what you were saying,
in what is a fantastic matchup for the Rogue, according to my co-caster,
fantastic
Alexander Raven Baguli.
Don't you lie, Subtle. I will say, though, I do think what you talk about right at the start of the day with Priest kind of being that weird sort of central point of the meta, which sounds strange as one of the few aggro decks that are being played right now. Like, that's the deciding factor. It's going to be interesting to see how it performs the rest of the day. But we are now going to get Seiko on his final deck of the series. Of course, this being Conquest means he is one with Rogue, he is one with Priest, which means he only has Warlock left over to go up against this Rogue again from Frenetic.
Yeah, and this is something that we can get into because when we're talking about how common the lineups, how uniform the lineups are in Europe this week and across a lot of regions, honestly, this week. I think the Warlock is one of the big kickers in that because, yes, everyone's bringing Warlock, but there is variety within the Warlock as to whether there are gnolls, whether there's an Anetheron, whether there are flesh giants. We're seeing a straight-up full fatigue package from Felkane, including 2 armor vendors and Moarg artificers in the deck as well for that extra removal power to be dealing with brutes, for example, maybe on the other side. I'm not sure if Felkane is a
brute,
ban
maybe?
for a little brute, a little 6/7, maybe a 7/8 on the board that you might need to clear up. But from Seiko's side, he is just going with a fairly standard list in terms of mid-September 2021 of what we're seeing from Warlock with the double rod in there. He is choosing to play 1 Viper, which he's had to make room for. But again, we've talked about this a lot with Seiko. He is very, very diametrically opposed to me on deck building philosophy. He likes variety, he likes one-offs, he likes tech cards. It's a very Seiko way of building the deck.
Looks like, yeah, he is just going to shuffle this one and have a natural card draw, proccing the weapon next turn. Which is, might be nice. It means he doesn't either necessarily have to tap or he has spare mana to tap and mana feed a Panthera next turn.
That's an upgrade. Probably.
Like surprisingly strong turn from Frenetic there, just in terms of tempo, right? Like,
yeah,
they're not the biggest minions, but they're really awkward. And for the first 5, 6, 7 turns of the game, Warlock only really wants to spend mana tapping. So having to like almost respect this board for Seiko is a bit frustrating.
I remember, I think it was Seiko last week that was playing School Spirits in Warlock, right?
Yes.
For exactly these kinds of situations, because I do think Rogue makes these boards that Solren doesn't interact particularly favorably with, because, you know, it's too expensive to maybe throw down and clear a Divine Shield at the same time, whereas School Spirits versus Rogue has just always been the go-to card, massively effective against basically any board they've been able to make for, what, the last 3 metagames or so, it seems, at this point. Even Jandis, right? Throw Jandis into it. School Spirits just nuke the vast majority of what Jandis could produce as well.
You see the, just again, the heavy respect on card draw that Seiko's putting down here. He could have just gone touch on one of these minions with a tour guide, but choosing not to, even hold in the tour guide now as well. And so just happy to just take some damage, honestly. And as Warlock, you do have the ability to heal it until you don't, which I think is the slight fear.
Yes. And from Frenetic's side, he completed his quest this turn. He drew Field Contact. Seiko is still some way away from completing his quest.
Would love the secret pick there from Frenetic, but Frenetic, a good Hearthstone player, being a little bit more sensible.
What was it, Shenanigans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just versus Warlock, right? Is you know they're going to tap.
Raven is very literally a fan of shenanigans.
Yeah, that's true. It's a great word. Okay, well, Rod's kicked in here, and this is where the big things happen for Warlock. And this is the true power, honestly. The builds we have right now of Warlock, you wonder why the heck we weren't playing them beforehand, because if you get the Rod to go off a couple of times, you do like 3 turns worth of stuff in 1 turn as Warlock and then win the game. It's so strong, and we're getting awfully close to seeing that level of strength from Seiko's upcoming turns right now.
I do think the Flesh Giant has a lot to do with it, and I think a lot of people frame it as, well, the Giants keep getting more expensive, so now we're playing the Rod to make them cheaper, but I don't think that's really it. I think the greater story is that no one ever used to want to play a Rod on turn 3 because you'd much rather tap or backfire that turn, because
activate Giant,
that enabled you to get a Giant on turn 4, right? Back in the day, where if you went tap Tour Guide, then you could just play Giant on turn 4.
Yep.
Whereas now, you know, tapping or backfiring on turn 3 just changes Giants from slow to a little bit less slow. So I think the long-term benefit of rodding in that position instead has just become much more worth it, which I think is a big part of the reason why we've seen that transition.
I really like that play from Seiko. It's something I found myself doing more and more is soul rending even though you lose a lot of minions on your side of the board, because he is very close to activating 10 cards or less. And look at his hand. He's got a Bristleback, a Scavenger, sorry, 2 Bristlebacks, Scavenger, and 2 Giants that are very rapidly going to cost, 1 or less, which means he can have that one massive turn, fill the board up with threats and say, okay, Frenetic, you need to kill me this turn or you're Omega dead.
Quiet.
That's an upgrade. Probably.
Frenetic reacting, waiting as long as he possibly could here, I think, just getting as greedy as possible with the field contact. Hits that magic number, which is usually around 7 mana at the point where you can do something fairly disgusting with field contact, and decides that this is the turn that he wants to go in. It was a hard pass on the previous turn for Frenetic just to stack this up and enable it to be a little more powerful on this turn, but he is now reaping the rewards of that. Prepped very quickly here. I'm not sure what the plan with the prep necessarily is.
Cram session?
Yeah, my issue is overdrawing, right? Because prep cram session can potentially get you into a... I guess cram session's only drawing 1 card right now.
Yes, because
it's spell damage.
Yeah. And it's not a effect to proc with field contact, right?
But this is what I thought his initial instinct was, to go for the Secret Passage, but this is now an 8-card original hand again, so we're kind of back in this same spot that he was in previously, but he is going to end up using that Shadow Step on the field contact just to buy an extra contact for the following turn, and this is fine. No overdraw problems on this one.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure if that turn really achieved what Frenetic wanted it to. It felt like it came short a little bit there, and that could just be the little gap that Seiko needed. You can proc this Rod again quite easily with Backfire. I'm not 100% sure what his quest is looking like right now. I imagine it's going to be a Backfire play just to get these Giants even cheaper.
Yes.
Oh, and there's Battlegrounds Battlemaster as well. This is what I was talking about. Like, look at the... This is what you should try and do with this list if you're ever playing like this Warlock list on ladder. Is just be safe for X amount of turns and then play every card in your deck in one go. And it looks most of the time.
Yeah, I think in certain matchups, absolutely. And
Yes.
I think Rogue is one of them because, Rogue has the ability to deal with 1 Giant at a time if they come down, right? With a Shadow Step, Prize Plunderer, pick up a Poison Golem from a Kazakus. That was an awful lot of Ps in a row with Prize Plunderer, pick up a Poison. Thankfully, it wasn't throwdown casting at the time, but here we are. But when this kind of board all comes down at the same time, particularly if you can just slam Cult Neophyte on top of everything else, as Seiko is able to do with the Raised Dead, this is the kind of board that just absolutely shuts down your opponent.
And in many matchups, this is just unrecoverable, right? We can see Frenetic with double Brain Freeze can buy some time. And maybe it'll be enough as he digs through with this field contact as well. But he starts to be a little bit afraid of what a Battleground Battlemaster will do.
That's right. Okay, double Plunderer now as well. Remember, 1 Shadow Step was used on this field contact to bring it back to hand to begin with. Seiko can clear up quite nicely here.
Go starting Prize Plunderer on the 6/6, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I do like the sequencing here overall. Obviously, eliminating the lifesteal is important, but obviously also eliminating the minion next to the big minion with high attack was also very important there, right? Because if he ended up on a line where he didn't kill the 6/6, that meant that Battlegrounds Battlemaster would do the least possible damage because the highest attack minion would be next to a frozen minion at that point.
Oh, so now he can Tamsin, right? He can Tour Guide, tap Tamsin, Blast, Bristleback? Have I just added a million cards or mana?
I don't know. I was getting carried away with Tour Guide, tap Tamsin, Prize Plunderer, pick up a Penguin. Like we're just getting everywhere with the
Well, he's right. Tour Guide, tap Tamsin. You can play Tamsin. That'll reduce it down to 1. The Bristleback will be 0? Or is that still 1? I can't see now. Can Bristleback 1, Unstable Shadow Blast the other? Or 2, still have Drained Soul? This looks like a very solid turn.
It does. You are not wrong.
Can you tell I've been playing this deck all morning? I'm like, I see the Matrix.
All of Stormwind shall share my pain.
is my correction.
But Seiko is at the point now where without the backup or at least help of a neophyte being played this turn, he has just got to hope Frenetic doesn't quite have it, right? Because with 5 cards left in the draw, you kind of expect him to be dead this turn, I think. A fair assessment, Sol?
I would think so, yes.
You're paying.
Frenetic here, kicking off with the Octobot spell damage, signifying that he is going to go for the lethal here. I imagine this Swindle is going to be played if the cram session does not pay out. And decide how much spell damage he wants on this cram session first. He has plenty of room in hand, so I see no reason not to go for the 3 cards. Alright, says all 4. This is just a calculation of how many actual draws he needs from the field contact, and I think he's right to do this because obviously every spell damage you add is net 0 draws, right? Because yes, sure, you lose a draw from the field contact, but you gain a draw from the cram session. So it absolutely, no matter what you do, as long as you keep adding spell damage, you're breaking even at the very worst, right?
Does have now the field contact for that additional couple of draws. As Garot has prep.
Oh, Neophyte, prep, Garot. However, how much real mana does that Swindle cost? Oh, it costs 1!
Yeah.
Oh no, he's 1 off!
Is this it?
Not enough, right?
That's short, isn't it?
I'm almost out of
There's only 1 Garot in the deck.
Yeah, yeah. I was just looking at the spell damage, but it's only 5s.
Yep.
Oh, literally a mana away.
I give up.
So close for Frenetic. But that means Seiko is going to take the victory. It looked extremely close. And as I said, Seiko going into that final setup turn had to just hope Frenetic didn't have the goods. And it just cost him that little bit too much mana to get them. And the field contact, especially being drawn at the end, meant they had to pay 3 for it, which again is not super common in those kind of ending turns. So a big game there. Sottle's blinking a lot and thinking a lot.
It's hard. It's hard. I'm trying to find it just in my head at that point. But yeah, it's really difficult because obviously what he needed in the end was more mana. And if you need more mana, generally what you want to do is Shadow Step Octobot at some point, right? However, because the turn kicked off with Cram Session, there's very little way to do that effectively, because as soon as you go Octobot, proc your Octobot with your spell damage guy, as soon as you Shadow Step that Octobot, you're then losing spell damage, right? So you have to do the calculation of how much spell damage you actually need if you get the whole way through your deck. But also, when I was talking before about how you're net 0 with Cram Session, it's not only damage that you're losing by Shadow Stepping your Octobot once it already has spell damage on it, it's card draw from the Cram Session that you're also losing. So then what happens then if field contact is bottom 2 cards and you only drew 3, for example, right? Then you have to play the Swindle as well. Right. That's a really, really, really hard and lethal to navigate at the end. You know, it's one of those things where given 15 minutes to look at it, you can then write a Twitter thread on what the optimal line was, but 75 seconds in the moment, I think what Frenetic ended up going for was reasonable. First thing you have to check, was the decision to even go for it that turn correct? Yes, absolutely. Look at the state of the board on the other side. And, you know, was the way he went about it reasonable? Yes, I think so, because that Cram Session was the limiting factor overall. Was there a way for guaranteed lethal? I'm going to say probably. Can I tell you what it is right now? No, sorry.
My only guess would be would the fact that 2 Swindles were left means that he could do something with 2 Swindles instead of the field contact. I'm not sure, but just because everything happened at once there. But that would be my guess. But most importantly, Seiko took the victory over Frenetic, joining Bly's getting out of Group D here. And if you're wondering, no, we haven't time traveled. We did Group D first today, so don't worry, there's plenty more Hearthstone coming up. We're not about to cut for the day and say you've